Hi, everyone. Welcome back to MIT Is, the podcast. We are your new hosts. My name is Oby and we're introducing our other new host, Gabe Owens.
Hello.
The former hosts of this podcast, Gonzo and Melissa, graduated this past May, and we congratulate them and thank them for all their time and dedication to this show. So if you're listening, we wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
I would just add that Gonzo and Melissa, stop listening to this and go do real life stuff.
So, how are you, Gabe, today?
I'm okay. Unfortunately, though, my cat keeps trying to meow in and out of this room, and even though I keep closing the door. And I think it's important to talk about my cat and the sounds that it might make throughout this, because I always find that podcasts are very grounding to me when they start speaking about their immediate environment, usually including pets.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of Bedford, Massachusetts. Not much is going on, but it is a beautiful day. It's 4 p.m. right now. Really hot now. It's like in the 90s and such. So, it's a nice day here. How's it out there in California, Gabe?
I'm in Los Angeles. I'm literally on Hollywood Boulevard. It's like very hot most days, but that's okay because I usually spend most of the day inside, and then we'll walk outside later in the day when it's hotter. Unlike Bedford, a lot is happening here. We're sort of in the midst of a lot of different violent clashes for racial justice that continue several months after the inception of them. So that's happening daily.
Cool. So we're gonna get into that a little more. But first, I think we should definitely introduce ourselves. I know most of our listeners have no idea who we are. So I'll just start. My name is Oby. Once again, like Gabe, I'm a rising senior here at MIT, studying physics and minoring in political science. I'm from Massachusetts, actually born and raised. Originally lived in Cambridge, where MIT is, so just sort of interesting. And in the future, I hope to go to law school. So right after I graduate, those are my plans.
I am also a rising senior. I'm from LA. I've been studying aerospace engineering, which is Core 16. But more recently, I've been interested in the idea of considering technology in a socio-technical standpoint, which is an STS framework. That's another kind of area of research and area of study at MIT. And so I've been working on trying to align myself with principles of design that advance justice instead of divide people or harm people, which is something you have to actively do in academia and in engineering.
We're going to talk about that some more. First, we'll talk about, where we are and where our life has been since COVID and, how things have changed. We're going to get into Black Lives Matter a little more because it's definitely something that has impacted both of our lives. And I think it's sort of changed our perspective on a lot of things this summer. And then we'll just talk about our future at MIT and what this year is looking like and how, because there's been a lot of ground swelling around future plans at MIT. So, we'll just end and talk about what that is and how we have dealt with that. So first of all, let's talk about life since COVID. What has it been like going home for you? What's the academics and the professional impacts of COVID? And, just personally, what has been going on with you, Gabe?
Oh my, okay. So I think there was a paradigm shift in the way that we all had to deal with our education. And in a way that was not conducive to most people. Yeah. I know that I have trouble sitting in class, but I'm bound there by this pretty deep enjoyment of learning, and the fact that if I wasn't there, I would be anxious about not being there. So there are a whole bunch of social factors that I've convinced myself are necessary to school. All of those things completely evaporate when class goes digital. I have really no motivation at all to sit in front of a computer screen and have a one directional experience where I stare at the screen and have information flow at me.
Yeah.
There were some classes that had discussion, but even then, I'm sorry, Zoom just isn't that good. Because Zoom simply cannot replace the experience of having a three-dimensional room where people can raise their hand behind you and then you can hear voices from different directions. It reminds you that you're a human living in the world, and instead that everything is just coming from this plane that you have to charge every couple hours so that it doesn't die. It's really crazy and very strange. But so yeah, school was like kind of dissolved for, I think, a lot of people after COVID, while we were all just trying to like cling on to whatever semblance of education still existed. But we got through it, and that was fine. For professional, I had a whole bunch of like possible internships lined up. I've been really trying to work at JPL for like the last 3 years, and it just didn't happen because they were all like, hey, we can't do this anymore. A few of them were supposed to be like on campus that I was like pretty close to getting, and they just said like, no, we're not going to have anyone on campus. Good luck.
Yeah.
See you later.
And I went through something extremely similar, especially with the academics, because like you and so many MIT students, I'm here in the pursuit of knowledge. Like I love learning about physics. I love learning about the law. And you never really realize how dependent it is on the people around you. And I think once the community was taken away, the core parts of MIT that I truly love sort of went with it. So then that was rough. And I think it took away a lot of my motivation to like get up in the morning and go to class. And
yeah,
you think that's hard when you're at MIT, but then when you don't even have the option of doing it, then it turns into something else completely.
Yeah, I love learning, but it's that is just so difficult.
And then professionally, something similar. Like I was applying to things since like January, and applying, and it's just as we left campus, like one by one, every opportunity was just sort of pulled out. So it came to a point where I ended up having to volunteer at the law firm I was working at last summer, and I think it was good and bad. It was good because I started dealing with a lot more problems that I care about. So for our listeners, I'm working at a law firm doing tax law, primarily around the CARES Act, which distributed or allowed for our stimulus payments or economic impact payments. And most people have gotten it, but there is a small group of people who have not. And those are mostly low income and people who don't usually file taxes, who are disproportionately people of color. So I've been working to help people file their taxes or to understand why they have not received those payments. So
right,
it puts everything in perspective as well, because you remember that, okay, this is rough for me, but there are people who are literally struggling to make rent, struggling to pay bills and such. So,
in fact, that's honestly most of the world. The working class in general is not doing well right now.
Yeah. So it's hard because as a student, I think a lot of students are struggling in very similar ways. And I think COVID has sort of exposed how uneven our playing grounds are, and how low income students, especially at MIT, have been sort of hit the hardest, and like first gen students as well, and the need for support that people have and how important MIT is in that.
Yeah, it serves such an important function. Like I'm sure that for like as a low income student, I grew up not knowing whether or not I'd be able to afford college. Like I always knew that I would be able to get into something, but I didn't know how it was going to be paid, and I honestly didn't really want to think about it. Money still to this day gives me so much anxiety. I just like whenever there is an easy way to not have to consider it and think about the rest of my life instead, like I'd rather. So when I got in and saw like the scholarship and that it was like fully paid because my parents didn't like made underneath the threshold. I literally like it was a dream come true because I didn't think that that was possible.
Yeah.
And especially because like you grow up hearing how expensive college is and how like loans and debts like literally cripple people.
Mm.
The student debt crisis right now is tremendously high. It's worse than the credit card debt, and the credit card debt was a scam. So that means that this scam works better than the credit card scam, which is insane. Which is where you get that narrative that, I'm sorry if this is a tangent, but that's where you get that narrative that college is a scam. It's truly not for a lot of people, but the financial element, all of the subsidiary organizations that exist only to profit off of literal children who want a more education is appalling. And I'm glad that I'm personally very fortunate to have avoided that, but I hope that no longer remains a thing in the future.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it calls into question, like, what role does college play in a student's life? Like,
absolutely.
For me, it's huge because I love MIT. There, of course, I have my grievances about it, but I don't know if there's ever going to be a time in my life where I have so much exposure to the people and to just different areas of learning. And at the same time, it's like you think about the whole institution of college and the access that it provides, and the opportunities that people get out of college. And you think about the fact that most people around you, like your friends that may be going to other schools, are going to it, but they're leaving with this huge burden that they have to carry to the rest of their lives of debt. And I think it's interesting because COVID sort of forces us to think about that even more, with the huge economic impact that so many people are receiving. And it just shows people need help. And something needs to actually be done here.
And truly how close so many of us are to complete financial ruin. We don't have generational wealth to fall back on, maybe like our parents' savings, but they also need to fall back on that. There are there are entire institutions that a lot of MIT students and a lot of like low-income students of these like primarily white institutions who get in are suddenly exposed to and had no idea of their existence before. And it's shocking. It's really shocking sometimes.
And I think we'll I know we're getting a little off topic, but but the one last thing I would like to mention is, like, it just sort of shows how it's sort of scary to think about this, especially as a low-income student myself as well. Like, you don't ever think you're that close to like your economic downfall, but like I remember this one friend telling me, like, you are one tragedy away from this is kind of morbid, I'm sorry, but it's like you're kind of one tragedy away from complete ruin.
And that's true. And guess what? We just got hit with two major, enormous tragedies back to back, almost simultaneously.
And I think that's, and my friend, when he said this, he was talking about like I know we love to identify with like celebrities and people we hear like in the media, and we love to connect with that, but the reality is that the majority of our nation is much closer to, I think we think that we're such a great society, and we think that we're doing the best that we can compared to anyone else in the world, but the reality is that we don't really have any safety nets here.
We could certainly get into that. But the last thing I want to say on this is, like, while I had a lot of issues with the campaign and the general philosophy, it's not about specifically UVI, but just in general. Andrew Yang did point out something very important, and that's that the majority of Americans cannot cover a $400-$500
hospital bill.
expense,
Yeah, or something.
something like that. Basically, like most Americans cannot cover like a simple expense that rolls through because we are on these very specific financial tracks that cannot deviate in any single way. And if there's a missing link somewhere along the lines, like that train will fall off the tracks very easily
Yeah,
for most people.
I agree.
But we can recenter the conversation we were talking about.
Yeah, of course. But we'll probably get into this a lot more in the future. But you mentioned, we experienced two tragedies. Of course, one is the major world pandemic that hit us like a freight train. And then, of course, midway through the summer, I think everyone everywhere heard about, the murder of George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor as well. And I think we should definitely talk about that because I know you've been doing a ton since and a lot of organizing. I know that on campus, like within communities I'm in and that other people are in, it was also a lot to deal with on top of everything. So first of all, just how are you doing, and what was that sort of like as an experience?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would like to preface that I'm not sure in what capacity my face will be shown this first episode. For future episodes, I'll have my full face out, but I'm not Black, so that's an important thing I need to preface in this conversation. My work so far has been as an ally and trying to assist organizing. Basically, since I've come back, and this I came back to my home. I didn't go somewhere else. So I came back here, and for the first like couple months, I was back because we left in March.
Yeah.
For the first couple months, so like March, April, everything was pretty quiet. But I kept hearing things about how, like the racial tensions were getting, because LA is like an interesting place in that it's kind of like a tinderbox for all of these problems.
Yeah.
This can go on for this conversation could go on for hours, but I'll synthesize it by saying that that different ethnicities in Los Angeles have been weaponized against each other forever. So much so that it is a remarkable moment when different ethnic groups come together as a whole, in the light of things like police brutality. This happened in the 90s, in 92.
Yeah.
There was a very famous pact between different groups of people, say it that way, that resulted in a collective fight against police brutality. We've seen that happening recently too, but there was a absolute seismic shift in the entire way that this country dealt with police recently.
Yeah.
With a whole bunch of anti-police protesting. At this point, I've been arrested 5 times for literally peaceful protesting. Each of the cases are entirely nonsense. The police, in the same way that we are a few steps away from financial ruin, the majority of Americans, police are a few phone calls away from being riot squads, all of them. Police have been heavily militarized, and these protests have resulted in literally extreme reactions from the police. So there's been a lot of protests, daily actions since May. So basically, sorry, again, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but to summarize, in LA specifically, LAPD receives $3 billion in funding every year, which is 54% of the city's budget. Education, on the other hand, receives a sixth of that, and the rest of the city literally receives less money than the police do.
Yeah.
The demands of Los Angeles are to defund the police and reduce their budget. The current best plan on the table is the People's City Council budget, which proposes to drop the funding to 1% and then reallocate that funding to community safety and mental health wellness support.
Yeah. So since all this went down, I've been trying to listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's this really great podcast called Behind the Bastards. It's on iHeartRadio, and what they talk about are, the bastards of history. So they go into like the background of people like Hitler, Stalin, and they had this really great series that I think a lot of people would like, called Behind the Police. And a huge thing that they talked about was the militarization of police and why that even started. And it was interesting because at the start of the podcast series, they talked about what police officers, what police forces used to be like, and how in many ways they used to be highly corrupt organizations. Like, you would see police like the NYPD, for instance, running things like prostitution rings, I believe, just,
Yeah.
crazy things like that. And how police forces have to sort of struggle to get rid of that, and that led to the creation of unions. And the issue ended up being that because of these systems set in place, especially these unions, police officers were not often, they weren't held accountable for their actions. And they also discussed how police officers became more and more militarized over time, and how that came about, and different people that created different reforms to lead to that. And the over militarization of police is a greater issue than a lot of people probably understand. And the SWAT teams, for instance, like, we think that SWAT teams are needed for these huge events that happen, but the reality is that things like SWAT teams aren't even being used towards very often.
Absolutely not. I have two very specific points about that. First, I think people don't know, and they need to know that police officially directly descended from slave patrol.
Yes.
The first police force in the United States was essentially the KKK. It was literally runaway slave patrol. And it is evolved, but not that much. The same tactics that they used then are very similar to the ones they use now, including the systematic racism that exists in a lot of departments. Second, I read this really great Medium article. And if you are listening to this and you got into MIT and you're waiting and ready to come in, be prepared to read some Medium articles, because I get sent so many and I don't know why, but they're convenient because they tell you how long they are. But I read this Medium article about Foucault's boomerang. Michael Foucault is this French philosopher who had a lot of thoughts on historical materialism, and his boomerang was something that the boomerang idea was something that he proposed, which is the means by which colonists or imperial powers practice their oppression overseas, and then it boomerangs back to us. So what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is the high militarization of police, which we've seen in other countries by literally the way of military existing there, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we've also seen, like in Portland, for example, right now, unmarked federal agents, which are mostly contractors, which means they are paid by the military, by the federal government, but are private themselves, come in and perform urban tactics, which is the exact same thing that has happened in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 10 years. So and this kind of like boomerang exists in almost all colonial powers, by which they, since these countries are basically exercising the way that they control people in other countries, that will come around and boomerang back to us, because it's ultimately the same idea of controlling the populace.
Yeah.
And that is really concerning. That's something that that's not a framework that we use to look at this at all, because a lot of people denounce the wars happening outside of our country, not realizing those same tactics are going to come back and affect us, and maybe not us directly, but people that we know, almost exclusively Black and brown people also.
Yeah. And I think a huge discussion that, a lot of people have heard about police abolition or the idea of defunding the police. And I think in many ways it incites a lot of fear. And I think I've realized that, when you get into college, you're around people that, are more, I don't want to say more intellectual, but, people that are grasping, very broad ideas or, concepts that you may not necessarily think about outside of a college setting. And
yeah, more studied.
yeah, of course. And I think the concept of, I remember seeing this tweet. It was like the concept of defunding the police sounds crazy until you realize we've been defunding education for years. And I think overall in college, I'm seeing a lot more discussion about public safety and what that really means, and whether our police officers or our police forces are really ensuring our safety the way we think they are. And I think defunding the police, it sounds crazy until you realize that the police aren't working in ways that we think. And this podcast that I mentioned talked a lot about media and how that contributes to the way we perceive police. And when you see shows like, NCIS or
oh my God.
when you see
even
perceptions of police forces and you think that, oh, they're professional, they're, they get things done, they solve these crimes, they're protecting our community. It's not really like that in real life everywhere. It's not like that. And I think this is why this is so important to really think about these ideas before you shut them down and think, oh, this is not right.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of I hesitate to use the whole word, so I'm going to use propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
The normalization of police as an important, healthy, functioning part of our state. Mm-hmm. Is a concerted effort in media and needs to at least be recognized by people. And like, I love CSI, but I also recognize that the narrative that cops always go after the bad guys is fundamentally reductionist in the way that bad guys are people, in this case, that don't align with our laws, which don't also align with our morals. And that's something that I think we really need to recognize. Our laws are not the same as our morals. Our laws are not moralistic. They are punitive in nature.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We're allowed to believe that because that is the truth. Quite plainly.
Yeah. So something else we could sort of get into is what you've been seeing at MIT. I know, so for our listeners, I don't know if you've seen me, I am a Black woman. And I'm a part of, the Black Students Union here on campus. And we've been trying to come up with ways of approaching the administration mainly. And, the BSU has, I believe it was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, created a list of demands in conjunction with other, groups on campus of, things that they would like to see. So a part of that was like, the increase of or higher recruitment of Black faculty, minority mental health providers, just, things like that. And we have been sort of coming back to that and seeing whether there are ways that we want to adjust those or ask for more from the administration. And I know that we have done that. And we've been having a lot of conversations as to what the police mean to us on campus. Do we need MIT?
Right.
MIT has an entire police department. Is that necessary?
That is big fat. Wow. Yeah. I've since I've been so focused on other like things, I haven't really thought about that other than like, I wonder what we're doing about that. Yeah. What are we doing about that?
Yeah. And I know the members of UA have been like talking with our police chief on campus, and it's very tentative. There's, I think students know that MIT is not going to willfully get rid of their police force. But we've been talking about like, what would we want? What does public safety mean to us? Do we need police officers with guns showing up when someone needs a transport? Do we need police officers showing up with a gun for a noise complaint? Like, do we need that level of force? And members of the Black community have experienced aggression from our police. Like, this is not a foreign idea. Like, we have experiences within our community. So right now it feels like everything is sort of up in the air. Students, I know definitely there are a great amount of students that do want the abolition of MIT's police department.
I'm all for that. Oh my God.
But I don't know whether that is a movement quite yet on campus, and I don't think so. So it's interesting. I think it's something that I would like to see a different. If you're not going to get rid of MIT's police department, I would like to see some sort of change. Like even things like our dean on call. So for listeners, our dean on call is like, if someone's going through some sort of crisis and you need to talk with a dean at MIT, there's a phone line you call, but the phone line is through MIT Police Department. And it's things like that you have to call into question, because you're like, is everyone comfortable just talking to the police? And if I'm in a situation or some crisis, is that who I want to discuss, whatever I'm going through with?
We already have such a strong community support network, like truly very powerful. Our EMT service we don't recognize this enough. Our EMT service is student run.
Yeah.
It is student run and student coordinated. I sat next to Alex Lamb, who like coordinates the EMT service, and he was literally in one of our classes while we were doing like technical things. He literally was scheduling hours for people for that night. And I was like, what are you doing? How is this something you're capable of right now? But that's the thing. We have such a strong community support network. The groups on campus like already regulate themselves. There is no need for an armed security force roving around, especially when they are when and I argue this very strongly, their presence is violent.
Yes.
All of these peaceful protests are just that. They are peaceful. Some of them like escalate into rioting and looting, but those are no longer peaceful. I'm speaking specifically on peaceful protests. Every peaceful protest is peaceful until until the police show up, because police represent violence.
Enforce.
95% of police calls in this country are for non-violent things, but they become violent the moment the police show up there, because they introduce the possibility of violence. Mm-hmm. When two people are yelling at each other at a distance, and someone calls the cops show up with guns and batons and tasers and a giant car that they're not afraid to use to hit people. Mm-hmm. These things were not factors in the environment before that. There's no reason that we can't just have therapists armed with love and care that wander around.
I agree. Okay, well, I think the last thing I'm going to say here is I don't think people know how much of a presence the police have. And, people come from different backgrounds. There are people that come from places that have a heightened presence there. But, for someone like me, I came from like a nice suburb, upper middle class suburb. Never have I been in an environment where the police are constantly roaming around. Like when you come to MIT, you'll understand. And, yes, we're in a city and whatever, but, the presence of police at MIT is quite overwhelming. And I think we have been taught and we've been trained that that's a good thing. That's for your safety. And, this is what you need. We're in a, we've been convinced that, but I think for the first time, or not for the first time, now more than ever, we are really we're
have the momentum to question it too.
Do we really need a force on our campus? This is good. It's good. Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. So I do come from a place where that is the case, where constant police presence is the case, and let me tell you, it's awful. I've driven around with friends who you're just driving down the road or down the freeway and you see a cop car like drive by. Everyone tenses up because you don't know whether or not your car is going to get pulled over, and your driver will not. will be harmed. You just don't know that, because that is their function at some point. If the police over the course of the last 20 years in LA have killed 600 people, and in the last 3 months killed like 5 more, what is to say that you aren't going to be the next person, or your friend isn't going to be the next person, or your immigrant mom isn't going to be the next person? And that just is how that goes. They have, sorry to keep pulling it back to LA, but they have 38 helicopters, police helicopters. 38. What is that even used for anyway? So I'm so glad that because often I feel that there's a disconnect between the real world and MIT in the way that we deal with social issues and whatnot, because so much of our discussions are centered on technology and science and STEM in general, because that's why we're all there. But we fail to recognize that those systems exist within other systems that are very deeply tied to identity, race, class, and that we can't just ignore that when we build things. These things all have to be considered, and that's including the police force.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So, in our last, 10 to 15 minutes, we should definitely talk about MIT in the future. I know I was like maybe a couple weeks ago or a week ago or so, MIT released its plans for the fall. So for our listeners, seniors are going to come back in the fall, and in the spring, only juniors, sophomores, and freshmen will be able to come back. So that has created its own issues amongst different groups of students. So right now we're trying to de-densify our campus. There's been, new financial aid policies, and that has affected different groups of students differently. And a lot of people are thinking about moving off campus instead of staying on campus. So what are your plans, first of all, Gabe? And, how has the announcement been for you?
I resent you for putting me on the spot, because I honestly haven't not decided. But so right now I think what I'm going to do is try to find a place off campus with a few of my friends, because I get the general sense that being on campus will feel like being in a police state of sorts.
Yeah.
I still want to get tested regularly. Like, there are still aspects of being so like I actually haven't done too much research into this, or done my due diligence as a student to like figure out exactly what I'm doing based on the facts. But I'm not a freshman anymore, and I don't want a meal plan. I think that it's just not necessary. I don't want to isolate myself to the extent that that MIT would like me to, because I don't think that single rooms are the best arrangement of human beings for social reasons. So if I can generate a space where I am socially distanced from the vast majority of students, but have a close group of friends that all monitor each other, I would rather do that, because I think that that's more conducive to existing than being in a room alone, personally.
Yeah.
And I think it will also be cheaper, because on-campus housing for a student is a thing, is one thing, but then on-campus housing for a student viewed from an external perspective is absurd. It is so expensive.
It is.
And the rooms are really not that big. But also, like, I've gone through it, and I've put my time in Baker. I've spent my time in East Campus, and I love East Campus, and I would like to return at some point, but not yet.
Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna go back, probably like light load this semester, like take 3 classes or something, and then just see, because there are a lot of things happening in the world, and I don't want to disconnect. and MIT is we are really good at doing that. We're really good at throwing 7 classes at ourselves plus extracurriculars plus a sport, and then zoning out and just doing that. But it feels more irresponsible than ever to do that.
Yeah. So for me, I wanted to live off campus with friends, and the opportunity came up multiple times, but the impact of COVID-19 hit me this summer, so I wasn't able to secure a job. So like financially getting something to pay first month's rent, last month's, the security deposit, all that stuff, it just wasn't viable for me. So I'm gonna go back on campus, but once again, it does feel like you are trapped and you are locked in while on campus. And admin hasn't really told us a lot of what we can do, which I think is tough. So right now, luckily I have some friends to be around, but it feels like more of a move of survival, just, having a place where at least I can get tested and I'm safe, and the meal plan such is not ideal because I'm a vegetarian. Like I don't eat everything, right? So just having a meal plan is not ideal either.
Yeah.
It's really uncomfortable, I think. And the financial aspect of it isn't much better. So MIT is giving now this COVID-19 grant, which originally was only going to go to people who owe a certain amount of money, which excluded a lot of low-income people who have very low expected family contributions.
Yeah, it was a really weird like median thing. Yeah. Anyway,
it was really not for low-income people.
No.
So they changed it, and now they're giving the grant to everyone. But
Yeah.
But which is good. I'm not gonna act like I'm upset about that, but it was a huge thing where people were like, yeah, you can't just help people who have more money and leave the low-income people that are probably affected by COVID-19 in many other ways in their own lives. So it's a lot of uncertainty for the fall, I would say.
Yeah, I'm also like generally curious as to why it's planned this way, such that like they're bringing back the majority of students during the spring. Do they anticipate like a vaccine having come out, or?
Yeah. So a lot of the decisions of the admin have been like, hopefully there is a vaccine. So like if there's a vaccine, even seniors would be invited back to campus.
Because that's interesting, because there really doesn't seem to be like there's a big difference between having 1 class and 3 classes, but there really doesn't seem to be a giant functional difference between 3 and 4 classes. But I understand that they like switched it out in some way. I don't know, but I've been dating someone at MIT literally since I arrived, pretty much. So she's like basically a long-term partner at this point, and so my actions are pretty closely tied to hers, only because like not on some codependent stuff, but simply because it's way easier to be financially independent with 2 people, and it's also like just nicer to move in a unit, and I think that she had already decided that she was going to take an extra year, and it's looking like that makes way more sense for a lot of people, including myself. I know that I can't finish my MIT time like online. I tried it during the spring just now, and even though it was half a semester, it was very difficult. Not neurotypical enough for that. So I'm going to definitely take an extra year, which means I'll probably, again, going back to it, light load this semester and then extend that. Probably take a leave of absence next semester. And I was really considering taking a leave of absence this semester, but I think that if I take it would be basically like a year and a half leave of absence by the time I get back. And I don't know that the adage of spending more time away from school makes it harder to go back, but it sounds true, and there's no reason for me to challenge it.
Yeah.
We've made it this far. Let's just get through it, honestly.
That's a good idea. And I think overall, that probably will enhance your MIT experience in the end, because this is a terrible way of ending MIT. And of course, there are factors and such, but I think, giving yourself the time that you need to just actually work through your education and, taking a leave. A lot of people are afraid of doing that, but the reality is like that actually a lot of times is better for you, and it sort of helps you refocus your education and rethink about what you want to do. And if you're working, like maybe thinking about what you want to do beyond MIT. And I think that's a really great choice, honestly.
Yeah. Do you think you're going to finish this year?
I am, because I plan on going to law school. So I'm already getting into this application cycle. So next fall, I'm going to be entering a law school.
I've heard a lot of interesting things about how grad schools are going to restructure admission. Like, for example, I am aware that some are no longer taking GRE. Because first of all, standardized tests are done.
Yeah.
And second, standardized tests are dumber during a pandemic.
Yeah.
Standardized tests.
That is crazy right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Standardized tests have been shown methodically, repeatedly, and empirically so many times to be racist and classist in application, because there's literally a direct correlation between low-income POCs and lower scores. There is a irrefutable connection, because standardized tests rely on a student's ability to study, a student's ability to have time to study, and a student's ability to buy materials like tutors and books. And those things are also inextricably tied to race. So first of all, it should not exist. Second, all of those things become way worse and way exaggerated during a global pandemic.
Yes.
When the people who have access to testing frequently, who have access to medical support, who have the ability to social distance also, because not all homes or housing is inherently inherently built for isolation. Those things become even worse, and we don't have the data on that yet because it's rolling out, but we're just so past this. We are so past this. And I'm glad that some schools are taking initiative. But also, from an inside perspective, I spoke to one of my friends. Mom works at UCLA and does admissions for one of their departments, and she said that they don't look at GREs at all because they know standardized tests are done. Yeah. So that's the other thing. Best of luck on this application cycle, but don't put too much credence into standardized tests, because
Thank you. And best of luck also with, we'll still be talking, but I hope this semester goes well. I've taken a light load before, really good, especially in a time like this. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about whatever you do on your leave and what plans you have, but
I have some really like personally exciting plans that I'm recruiting other MIT students for. So I'm really not, that's the thing, like I don't mean to generalize, but none of us ever really truly light load or take time off. Like we're always trying to do some extra stuff.
That's true.
Yeah. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Productivity is a myth. It's okay.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. I know it's been some time since the last one, but we're really excited for the upcoming year. We're excited to discuss more and more things. So if you have any comments, just make sure you leave a comment on this episode, and we'll try to incorporate any new ideas. In the meantime, that's our show. So thank you, Gabe, for joining us, of course, and thank you for being a host as well. I'm really excited to have you here, and I know we're gonna do a lot of great things. Yeah. All right. Well, goodbye, everyone.
Signing off, I suppose.
Signing off.